Ready, Vince? Ready? Cool. All right, so today we're going to talk about event listeners and handlers. So something you may have already used in your apps, but we're just going to do an overview and show you a few different ways that you can write them, and specifically a few different ways that you can write and handle them in React as well. So it's nothing too exciting we're going to do, so we're just going to look at the principles and the ways that we do these things as opposed to doing any fancy events or really exciting event handlers, but we'll just make sure that it's very clear that when we hover over something or we click something, we're seeing how that element's changing, or maybe even a different element is changing, and we'll look at the code that we're writing to do that. So I've just created 3 boxes on the left-hand side, and a link which we'll use later to show a particular thing about events that we can do. So does anyone, well, there are typically 3 ways to handle events. Does anyone know, or could you describe any of these ways if you don't know the name that we assign to those ways? So 3 ways of handling events. So onClick is an event itself, yeah, a browser event. So we could look up what the actual events are. So if we went to browser event somewhere, so it's done it like that. So mouse events. Yeah, so mouse events click. Yeah, so that would be a mouse event, but I'm not necessarily looking for the event names themselves because there's hundreds of them, yeah, or maybe even thousands. But how do we actually handle one of those events? Or how do we set up a listener? And then how would we handle that? So 3 ways to set up event listeners. Yeah, so in React you might have used an arrow function in the render, yeah, or in the return statement. So that's one way. So typically we had inline ways of doing it, yeah. So you wrote it inline in the actual particular element that you wanted to attach the listener to. React does something similar with the syntax, so it looks like it's inline, but under the hood it's actually very, very similar to another method. Inline event handlers were sort of the old way of doing things. We've got a more modern way now. React copies parts of the syntax, but uses the modern stuff under the hood, yeah, to create the event listeners. But yeah, I accept inline as one, definitely. 2 others?
You bind it to this in the constructor?
Yeah, so but when we bind it in the instructor, we still add an event listener in line as well, don't we? Or we have the event handler name, don't we, in line? Yeah. Okay, so if we wanted to include that way as well, that we're up to 4 versions now then. So if we do a bind and then a link to the event handler name. So, okay, yeah, I accept that one as well then. So 2 others. Think maybe outside of React, how would we add an event listener as well? Because a JavaScript function, yeah, maybe. What one? Have you got anyone in mind?
I was just saying a generalized sense.
Oh, you're saying that if we added an event listener, then we write a general JavaScript function to handle it. Yeah, so let's set up the listeners first. So how do we set up an event listener? So we can either do it inline, or we can do it in 2 other ways. And if we're not getting there, I will let you know. So set state, no. So there's actually something called add event listener. Yeah. So that would add an event listener. And that's valid outside of React and also inside of React. Generally we use the inline React syntax, but just to let you know that other way does exist as well. And I'll show you both very, very shortly. And the third way, which is not used much anymore, is DOM properties. So we can literally assign it directly to the DOM element by chaining on a property. Yeah. So let's have a look at some of those ways now, and we'll just do some basic events to change these boxes. Let me just drag this over slightly, I think. No, we're okay. Cool. So, this is my JSX, yeah, to render my render my actual app here on the left-hand side. So the first way we mentioned was inline, yeah, that was the way that we come up with first. So if I wanted to add an event listener to box 1 inline, what would be the approach that you would use? Vince or Richard might have different approaches. Where would I add it first? So box 1 is just my button element here. Yeah, so to add it inline, we're just going to add an extra property. I'll zoom in slightly in case you're struggling to see. So obviously we want a class name if we're writing in JSX, right? Apologies for that. And then we can just add an extra property inside of our button tag. And if we want an on-click event, yep, we can write on-click. Do we write like that? Capital C in React, yep. So in normal old HTML, it would be written like that. But if we're in React, which we are in this case, we're creating a React app, then make sure that your event listener or the event reference is capitalized, yeah, camel case, on click with a capital C. Okay, so on click, and then we can put that equals to something, yeah, and again, there are a few different ways of writing this. Vince, I think you said one way first. What did you suggest? Do an arrow function, yeah. And what does that equal to? So we'd essentially do the name of the method handler, right? Well, we haven't really set it up yet, but just if you wanted to. So this dot, I'll just call it for now handle click, right? Yep. So that itself would set up the listener by just having that property listed there equal to that bit of code, and this is the event handler, right? When that bit of code runs, when a click event is detected, then run the handle click method, which, yeah, there is one up there, okay? So that would then jump up here and run the code that's inside there when that click event is registered.
Should we have another parentheses on?
To invoke it. Whoops, what happened there? Okie doke. So just to check that that's working, let's do something really obvious. Let's change the background color of box 1 when that handle click is triggered. How would we do that with JavaScript? Does anyone know?
You want to change the background, right?
Yeah. Should we take a look at the console first? Because I've console logged a few things here. So I've logged e.target and e.current target. So these are a few properties that we might be able to make use of. So E essentially just stands for an event object. And when an event gets triggered, that event object gets passed to it can get passed to the handler if we include it. So let's see what's in the console when we actually click on this element. Hopefully we're going to have enough space. Where's my console gone? Oh, console's up there, isn't it? Yeah. Just to get rid of that warning, I am I'm going to comment that one out for now. And then, ooh, so we did something wrong by the looks of it. Is that on line 7? Cannot read property target of undefined. It's a bit strange. I'm a bit confused why we're getting it twice. So one time it seems to be working, the other time it doesn't. But anyway, so for now, hopefully you can see that when we click on our box 1, then the code up here is definitely running. Yeah, so our event handler is being triggered. It's detected that that is a mouse event. Yes, we're logging out that event. And there are a few useful things inside of here, such as the target, which is why I wanted to show you e.target, but essentially the target is going to be that, our button element. So I was hoping that we could use e.target.value shall we go a different way? So if I wanted to change the background color, for example, I could do chain on a background color to the style property. Background's hyphenated, right? Color. Let's say blue. What's going on here?
I think background color because it has hyphen, put it in the square brackets.
Ah, yeah, yeah. Otherwise it's doing a minus, right?
Puts around the background color.
Cool. Let's try once more. Yeah. Ooh. So it did work, and then something else is going on my app, right? I might have to maximize it so that we can find out what is going on. There's no errors, it's a runtime error. Let's just comment everything else out apart from what we're using. don't think a button has any default behavior that we need to prevent, but worth a try. Nope. We haven't passed the event in down here, have we?
Should we talk about it?
There we go. Sorry, yeah. So when we were writing our arrow function down here, we didn't pass in the event, so that wasn't getting passed to our handler, yeah? So sometimes we can do it without the event object, but I specifically wanted to use the e.target, the actual event that we clicked on, to enable some changes to that target, to that element in the DOM. Yeah. So there are different ways. So the easy way to change some styles with JavaScript is just to add on a style property, and then change it like that. Beware, of course, if it is hyphenated, you of course need to do what Richard suggested and put it in square brackets and surround it with quotes, and then just give it a value to whatever you want to change it to. If we didn't want to use e.target, is there another way of doing it? How do we select elements from the DOM usually?
Document get element by ID A.
Yep. So there are a few ways to select elements from the DOM. And get element by ID has been around for ages, and that is definitely one of them. So let's say we want to do something a bit weird now. Can we actually click on box 1 and change the style of box 2? Is that possible? Yeah, it's possible, right? So rather than using e.target, which will be the target that I've actually clicked on, let's query the DOM and select something. So let us do, Richard suggested get element by ID, yeah? So where is get element by ID? What is that attached to? Can I just write get element by ID, or? Yeah, so it's part of the document object in the browser. So I can do document.getElement by is it little d? It's little d, I think. Yeah. Get element by ID. And let's say we want to change box 2, which, just to make it clear, I'll actually give it an ID of box 2. So we can do box 2 in there. So at the moment we've got an event listener set up on box 1. So when we click on box 1, that's going to run our handle click event. And we're going to assign our box 2 element to a variable. So if we assign that to a JavaScript variable, then rather than using e.target, we could just use box 2, right? So this time, what is going to happen when I click on box 1? What's the end result? Box 2 will be what? Will be red. Indeed, yeah. Cool. So we've covered one way of writing some inline event handlers. And we've also covered that we can get an event target by passing the event object to our handler. So what's the value of e.target going to be in this case? Is it going to be box 1 or box 2? When I console log it.
Box 2.
It's still box 1 because you put the handler on box 1.
Yeah, it's still box 1, right? Because I put the event handler on box 1. So that's where it originated. That's where the event call originated. So if I run that, we need our console. Box 1's that one. And we get box 1, yeah, as our e.target. So that's really useful if you want to change the actual element that's being clicked on. Yeah, we don't need to query the DOM in any way by using getElementById. What are the other things to query the DOM? How else do we access the DOM? Anyone? Yeah. Hey, say again. Yeah. So you said getElementByClassName. Yeah, that would also work. So if these all have the class name of box currently, yeah? So if I do getElementByClassName,
Get elements for the
oh, you want elements? Yeah. Okay, but I was just going to say, if we did that first, then what box will get changed? Box 1 or box 2 or box 3? Say again? You don't think it will work? Let's see, shall we? So what was the error you were expecting, Porrick?
Richard already said it should be get elements.
Get elements by class name. Still doesn't work. Is it class name with a little n?
Oh, it's no,
Get elements by class name. So what has that returned? What has get elements by class name returned?
an array of each person for box.
So then we need to give a specific index. Oh, not I. Sorry. Let's say 1, for example. Will it work yet? So now it works, yeah? Because getElements by class name is returning not just one thing, so we can't just say, what's that with boxes, yeah? So we can't just say style all the boxes using that syntax. We would have to loop over it, yeah, if we wanted to style them all red. Or if we wanted just to style one specific box, then of course we need to use an index. So 0 for the first one. Yeah. 1 for the second. And so forth. Cool. Another modern one, which is meant to replace that jQuery selector, is query selector. So you've got query selector or query selector all. So query selector, if we use that on, well, what selector do you want to use? We can either use an ID or a class name. Let's leave it as box for now. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I said if we want to do a class, what do we need to do to that? Add a dot. Fantastic. Yep. So that will work. Or if you want to use the ID, if we want to do our box2 ID, we could do hash box2. Yeah, so query selector is quite powerful. We can query many things. We don't have to specify in the actual method name whether we're doing a class, an ID. We just have to make sure that we match it up correctly down here. So dot for a class or hash for an ID down there. Yeah. Cool. Yep. And you also had a query selector all as well. Yeah. Did you see that one? So again, we could return multiple elements, and then we could just change the second one. I think this will still work. Boxes, document. Oh, yeah, because I've done that, right? So box, and it's a class of box. So we should now have 3 boxes. So if you console.logged boxes, get rid of that one. Oops. Yeah, so you've got a node list. So it's listed 3 separate nodes with our 3 different buttons there. So we'd be able to style one or all of them just by using query selector all and then applying the styles that we wanted, or even applying different styles, right? We could apply all different styles. We could do box 1 as blue, box 2 as red, and so forth, just from that one query selector all. Nice. So that's the general setup of event handlers and event listeners, but I wanted to just talk about a few different ways that we could add event listeners and handlers as well. So currently we've used, where has it gone? This inline method here. So Richard, I think, quite likes to use bind. So how would we rewrite this to use bind, Richard? We can get rid of the arrow function, right? Leave it like that? No.
Take away the E part. Oh,
Don't want the E for now. Yeah. Okay. And we.
got bind was
So where am I going to bind it?
in the constructors bind.
Yeah. So we haven't got a constructor. So if we needed to use, well, we could use bind in the return as well, but usually we put it in the constructor for performance reasons. So we'd have to create a brand new instructor if we want to do it this way as well. And then the syntax, you're going to use what? This dot handle. Yeah. Handle click dot bind in parentheses this. Yeah. Okay. So there's that method as well. If you've got a lot of events, this can get very lengthy, I feel. I don't particularly like this way, but it is another way to do it. So we'll just double check that it still works. So if we click on box 1 now, what do we expect to happen? Nothing, right? Because we haven't actually done anything. So let's change box 2 again. What do you want to do to box 2 this time, guys? Give me a CSS property you want to change. So how would I change the border? So you want to do box 2 dot style dot border, or border style? What do you want to do? Yeah. Dashed. and then lime, do you say? You love that lime green, right? We can see it easily. Okay, yeah, I agree. So, box 2, we've created a selector with our ID of a matching element. And then we should apply a new style to that with a border equal to all that stuff. Let's see whether it works. Let's make it thicker. There we go. Yeah. Fantastic. Good stuff. So we've got the arrow function inline. We've got a bind method.
We could put this handle.bind this straight in the object, then we're creating a new function every time.
Yeah, so there are a couple of performance drawbacks with having your bind down there.
So we don't put equals thing.
No, true. This dot handle click dot bind this. Is that just, is there any spaces? No. Okay, cool. Just because it's on a new line. Yeah, so there are a couple of performance benefits with doing that in the return statement, and also with creating your arrow function down there as well, because it means that on every render a new instance or a new function, in the case of the arrow function, is being created. So that can take up a bit of extra memory and things like that we don't really want. So instead there is another syntax called the property initializer syntax, and we can still write it like that, but then on our handle event we just have to make it equal to the arrow function up here, and that still works. So that's a more modern method, and I think it will become the preferred method to do things. So we just write inside of the return statement our this dot event handler, and then we set our event handler method equal to an arrow function. So it's not fully supported yet, but it should be supported by your versions of Create React App. I think if we tried it on the platform currently, it's not supported. So we just need to update our version on the platform that we're using. But that's my preferred method of writing event handlers inline in React. Is the this dot event handler and then event handler equal to an arrow function. But I just want to show you another way as well, because we did mention at the start there were 3 ways, so that's all the inline methods. So the other 2 ways were add event listener and assign in directly to a DOM property. Yeah. So let's say that we didn't want to write anything down here. We didn't want to, oops, we'll leave the button there, but okay, I'll just delete it for now. Let's say we just wanted to have our markup down there, yeah, clear, no event handlers in there. So we could render that markup straight away, and then perhaps we might want to add some event listeners into the component did mount, for example. So add event listener, again, is that attached to anything, or can I just write add event listener? So Richard has suggested window.add event listener. And yeah, then that will take a couple of arguments. So the first argument is the type of event we want to listen for. So if we were listening for an on-click event again, what would we type in there? We would it be now like that? I think it's giving you a big clue, right? When I'm hovering over it. So notice that it's, yeah, because now we're dealing with window objects. So we're dealing with the DOM. So we can add an event listener, but that has just added it to the whole window at this stage. So not ideal, but it should still work. And then let's say we want to run the handle click event. So handle click is not defined. Why is handle click not defined, guys?
This one.
Yep, because we're inside a class, so we need this dot handle click. And now, if we click, well, does it matter where we click? If I click on box 2, box 3, box 1, what will happen? Nothing at the moment. Should this be window, or shall we make it a bit more specific? So if we write a query selector for box 2, for example, how do I do that? I want to select box 2 and assign it to a variable, assign that element to a variable. If I go and look at the code again, box 2 we have either a class name of box or we have an ID of box 2. Yeah, so I could either do get element by ID or I could do my query selector. I think get element by ID is slightly more performant because it's just dealing with IDs rather than having to cover a lot of different use cases. And then we can do box 2, right? And then what we can actually do is add an event listener to our box 2, specifically get element, have I spelled it wrong? Get element by, oh, of course, yeah. So that's attached to the document. And it's still not working. Oh, we don't need that anymore.
I think we take away the on from on click. We just say listen out for a click.
What was that, sorry?
And with add event listener, in the request we put click instead of on click.
I was just checking whether if we automatically invoked it, it works, and it does work. But that seems to suggest, yeah, that the click is the issue. Nice. So, different naming conventions. So when it's inline, then we need the on, but when we're adding event listeners, it's just click or, for example, mouse over. Yeah? Mouse leave, is that what it's called? Yep. So all those sorts of things. So event listeners are really useful just for buttons, for click events, for forms. So when you submit forms, all things like that. There's one little other thing I just wanted to show you, and that is to prevent the default behavior of certain types of elements. So when you're submitting a form and you click that submit button, you might want to have some custom checks in there, or you might want to handle that form in a different way rather than just sending it straight on to the back end. So I'm only going to show this with a link just because it's easier to show. So usually when we click on a link that has a URL of google.com, we're going to go to Google, right? If I click on that, it goes to Google. If I wanted to stop that default behavior, how would I do it? Anyone know? Let me give this an...
You want it to stop going to Google?
Yep. It's just to stop any events default. So the example I'm using is let's stop it going to Google, and instead let's change the color of the link or something like that. So I've given it an ID of link to help us. So we could still have a click event. And this time or we could add the event listener to our link. So when we click on that, we want something to happen. So for example, if we want to change the color to red, color of the text, will that work, or will that still go to Google? Yeah, exactly. It did actually change it, but it also went straight to Google. So how do I stop it going from Google? It doesn't need to be a new event. Okay, that's one way. We can just delete the link to Google, but yeah. Let's write it in line because this is maybe a little bit easier to deal with. But we could do the same thing, huh? Do a not? Okay, yeah, I like the idea. But instead, let's write our inline event handler down here. So how did we do the inline again, guys? We did an on click with a camel case C equals curly braces. Let's use property initializer syntax the modern way. So we do this dot handle click. I'm going to pass an event in this time. So then when we get to line, line 20, unclick this dot handle click. Does it get it by default? Let's have a look. So there's something called prevent default when dealing with events. Now, if that event has got passed correctly, e dot target. Nope, that still works. It's not the target. No, it's without. Yeah. So it is just e.prevent. Yeah, prevent the default of the event. Yeah, without the target. So Yeah, if we've got some default behavior that we want to overwrite or prevent in some way, then you can start your event handler with e.prevent default, and that will stop that default behavior happening. No matter how many times I click on that, it's not going to do the expected behavior of a link. It will only do whatever we've told it to do here. Yes, that could be useful for form validation to check people aren't, send it. You mentioned at the start, didn't you, Porrick, something like to stop injection attacks or something like that? Yeah, so you could do something like that on your form to check it beforehand that the text isn't too long or they haven't done anything dangerous before sending that code to the backend. Yeah. So you prevent the default, do all your checks, and then you can submit your form to the backend.
How would that stop the malform query going through to your database? I'd like to see.
This wouldn't at the moment, but usually when they click submit, it will just, the submission event will happen, right? Whereas you're preventing the default here, and then we could write some validation checks on our input fields, and to say, is the input field longer than this length, or does it contain JavaScript code or something like that, rather than just being a normal name or number or something like that. Yeah. So that's one way we might handle that. Cool. There are lots of different parts to that. So does anyone want to recap any parts of it? Again, I can share the snippet and you can play around with creating your own events and writing them in the different ways, yeah? Try those 3 different ways that we mentioned.
So the inline and the bind
Yeah.
are they effectively the same?
Yeah, to me they're effectively the same, yeah. So I'm classing that as one of the inline methods really with the bind.
I can just ignore bind forever and just use arrow function.
That's pretty much what I do, yeah. Ignore bind forever and use the other way if that works for you. Yeah.
Okay, cheers, alright.
Yeah, cool. Any other questions? Bind might be useful in other contexts, just to clarify, right? It's in the language, you might need it for, for some other things, but I'm not saying delete it completely from JavaScript. All right, yeah, I'll share that then and play around with it, and if you've got any questions, let me know. But hopefully writing some of those events will help you in the React board challenge as well, because there was definitely one in there, I believe. Awesome. Thank you very much.